going to start the recording, right?
I am now recording us, as well as our backup computer there, so no matter what, we will have a version of it.
Perfect. Okay, excellent.
So Svetlana, what were the thoughts, do you think, of us finishing up and getting a video from the last workshop to...
Yeah, I chatted with Ray, our executive director, and he liked the idea. Now Paul was away on holidays, so we didn't have a chance to sit down and chat, all three of us. We will do it this week and we'll get back to you and let you know.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah,
yeah, that workshop, I did a little bit of updates. I always do updates to it, but still that workshop seems to be the synthesis of a lot of the most recommended or most requested materials and information we have from our clients. So that'd be good to do and
yeah,
people up.
No, definitely. I think it is a great idea, and yes, we'll be in touch.
Okay.
We'll be in touch on that. So
just a quick request of Paul and Svetlana there. How are we coming through audio-wise? Can you guys hear us clearly?
I can hear you
fine.
Excellent.
Good to hear, thank you.
All right, and we are ready to go whenever you guys are.
Okay. So yeah, let's go live then.
All right,
Start letting people in.
Letting people in.
7.
Cool. I'm just looking at the time. We're at just 10 o'clock. My watch is saying, but I don't have an accurate. So we've just got a couple minutes.
It's 4 minutes too.
Thank you, Paul. Quite often we'll go ahead and ask for an opening prayer sometimes. What are your thoughts on that?
Whatever you're comfortable with in your territory, because you are presenting.
Thank you. I'm going to take notes this time because I know that as we go through, there's probably going to be people and or questions that we want to make sure we get back to people, because this is a much more complex arena, and there are more variances and tailored needs for each nation. So it's really important that we try and get back to people as much as possible. So if there is any kind of list, Paul, of contact information, and you could share it, that might make it easier in case I can just say to people as they go, if they have a question, I can follow up and let them know. I can email them something directly or connect with them. Is that possible?
That is, there's a list of all participants who have registered and who have participated, and we can do a follow-up with them.
Great, thank you. So we have some people joining us already, and for those people who are a little bit early, thank you so much. We love early people. We're just going to wait for 10 o'clock for our start time before we get going. Just respecting that some people will be signing on right on time, and we're just getting a little bit of details and some things worked out in anticipation of our workshop. So hang in there, grab your coffee, and relax. So the scope of this workshop, and to my understanding, it was BC wide, or is it Canada wide?
no, this particular one is BC wide.
Okay, that's what I thought. Good. And are you doing this type of thing throughout in each of the regions as well?
You know what we might be? We are just deciding now what will be happening and how we will be delivering it. So it's in the works. Yeah.
Excellent. I love that BC's testing grounds for all things new and great. Okay, what time are we at now? Excellent. Okay. So we are going to get started. We are at 10 o'clock. We have approximately 70 people registered and we have 18 online. So we are going to get started. If we get a number of people coming in a bit late, for example, 10 minutes late, we'll do a little bit of just a recap as we start to see a large number of people signing on. In the meantime, we will get started. So thank you all for joining us. My name is Kunkayas from the Yektanas clan of the Haida Nation. My English name is Larry Yektanas. I've changed my last name to my Haida clan name as a part of personal decolonization. Hadala Istis Akte Inse Gunelagan. That means good people. I'm happy to be here today. I'd like to introduce my partner, Mark, and we'll just get a shout out from our technician as well. So,
good morning. Welcome and good morning to our North Shore studios of Cardin Consulting in the Slaletop territory. I'm Mark Salter, born and raised Victoria. And we have Justin, who is manning and staffing the control buttons for chat access. So if you have questions that come up during the process, just indicate on the chat function that you have a question, write your question out. Justin will read it and then pass it along to us. So we'll do our best to answer it during the process of our presentation today. We have a question and answer period at the end, but we know that sometimes along the way there's some clarification needed. So please ask for that and we'll do our best to get it to you as quick as we can. We won't get too sophisticated with the hands up, but if you just send the texts out, and then if you need to speak, we'll connect back to you and get you to speak at that point. But send us your questions on the text chat. And Justin, you just wave a hand or say hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm down here in the bottom right of your screen. My name is Justin Cronus, also from the Haida Nation. I've worked with Cardin Consulting for a while as their IT support and help in any way that I can. So I'm honored to be here today and helping with this. So I hope to do my best here. If you have any questions, please relate them to the Lara Yektanas channel at the host level, and I'll see those and pass those along. Thank you.
and most importantly, we want to acknowledge traditional territory that we are doing this important work on, and that is the territories of the Slaletop, Musqueam and Squamish nations. We appreciate the opportunity to live, work, and play on the territories here. And we were just saying a little bit earlier on before we get started, thoughts around prayers, and just to relay our understanding of it from many elders that we've spoken to. There are prayers that in the Western world is understood to be attached to a religious or formalized religion. And for a lot of elders and for us, we believe prayer is something else. There's an indigenous prayer that's a sense of identity and connection around how we live and breathe and behave in the world. And for us, one that I was taught by Ovid Mekrity years ago is Creator, help guide my thoughts, words, and actions to serve the best interests of people today and future generations. So I'd like to start off with that. Thank you very much. So today we're going to be talking about the failed premise around establishing development corporations, the important points around values, principles, and the mandate established in terms of setting the strategic direction of a development corporation, performance measures and limits, how to establish a competency matrix to recruit board members. So who are those people that are going to be leading and guiding the direction of your development corporation for the benefit of your current and future generations? Shareholder and board member roles and responsibilities, what they are and what they could and should be. Corporate governance policies.
Corporate governance policies, the frameworks, reviews, including issue resolution, strategic planning, and reporting to remain accountable. Community advisory to build awareness and capacity in business development, diversification, understanding, ensure effectiveness and development, and sharing aligned opportunities. They're responsive to the community's needs. That's an important part of the corporation. Agreements that are made and repayment and reinvesting and planning are all part of the process that have to be reviewed in a good DevCorp.
Excellent. And then we'll have questions and answers. And quite often we will go, and because we have questions and answers throughout, which we really encourage because it's important for us to have something that we're speaking and sharing information and our experience and knowledge on. And when people ask about it, it allows you to share your best practices, your experience, and your questions that'll help inform everybody to learn. So if you can share as you go, that's something we find and we like a little bit more than Q&A at the end, but we will definitely allow time for Q&A at the end in case you like to keep notes and then ask at the end. For those people who may not want to participate online and ask questions online, please feel free to send in the chat via text and or an email at the end. You can send us directly any inquiries. We're happy to help. We have one question already.
Vanessa is asking, good morning. Will this be recorded and posted somewhere for those who couldn't attend?
Vanessa, you're amazing. Thank you so much. We were just talking about that. And because this information is so important for helping support the leadership development of our First Peoples in BC and in Canada, we have been talking with Can Do about recording these. We have been recording them and editing them so that they can be made available after the fact, so you can take a look at them again in the future as a reference material to be able to take a look at it. We have also added the PowerPoint and sent it over to Svetlana at Can Do, who will be sharing that with participants after the fact. So you will get a copy of the PowerPoint as well.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll have some closing comments and prayers after we finish that piece. So this is myself just introducing myself at this point. I wanted to be able to make sure that you know that I'm not just someone who just walked out and had no experience in this field. So I have about 12 years experience in senior management in Five Diamond Hotels and in retail, Holt Renfrew and other stores. I got pushed into management as soon as I started working for some crazy reason. And then went on to start using the skills and what I had learned to be able to want to serve our people. And in doing so, I ended up applying for and getting a position with Joe Gallagher from Visions First Nations Planning Group about 23 years ago. Worked with Joe for a number of years and went ahead to go on to start my own practice a few years later, and have been doing business and economic development for that entire time. In doing so, wanting to take a look at the core root issues of challenges in our communities and be able to realize our full potential as First Peoples. Decided to go ahead and start looking for those mentors myself that I thought I could learn from, and met up with some very kind and always successful people, support other people's success, to be able to learn really, really good community planning and development. And a couple of them who'd been doing that for 50 years prior to me speaking with them, shared all their information and tools and practices and how they do their work, and it really solidified my grassroots approach to work. Went on to continue to do that research and went on to get my master's degree in leadership, and am trying to find and think I might be getting close to a work on my doctorate in Indigenous governance. So that's my experience. Mark's been working again in First Nations communities for a number of years, going back 30 years to Ontario. So we do have experience, and we have been doing this for a while. So again, this is our sharing of our experiences with you, and we're asking you to share yours as well too throughout the presentation. So when we start taking a look at this, and we have this canoe specifically because as First Nations embark on their journey in their canoe towards realizing wealth building for the benefit of the current and future generations, they go with a lot of assumptions around what experts can and do tell them. And the failed premise is that the experts that we have out there in establishing development corporations are primarily lawyers, and lawyers are good for the role and place that they have in terms of developing an organization, similar to consultants and others. However, lawyers are not the panacea for everything. So one thing that's a massive problem with lawyers in terms of establishing development corporations is that incorporating a company, the vast majority, I've only met a couple who don't do this, go straight to an off-the-shelf articles of incorporation, which limits the scope of a community-owned development corporation to be accountable only to the shareholders. And it has a very limited scope in terms of understanding that it's important to be able to build the capacity of those leaders and future generations and the community to understand business development and how an entire community can do it effectively. So we end up with this very crippled mechanism by which we're putting so many hopes and dreams on, and it's really doomed to fail. So it is the failed premise by which we see many corporations having been established or currently being established. And when we've come in to help those, it's this wealth of experience, plus we've also got a legal counsel we like to work with who spent about probably 25 years doing the same thing, helping to remedy situations with development corporations. And she's had the similar experience as well. So we find that in establishing a community-owned development corporation where the assets and resources of that development corporation are owned by the community as a whole, whether it's financial, human resources, or natural resources, those assets are put into an organization that should be set up primarily to be able to do and function at its maximum efficiency. And that's what we're going to share with you today, our learnings on what that can look like. So again, what we find is that, I'm just want to make sure I cover one last piece in here. And that is that in terms of good corporate governance, we will be sharing later on what some of those pieces are in relation to building capacity and establishing a foundation in corporate governance too. So I'll let...
Those things that we should be developed include, these are the things we want to see in a community-owned development corporation. These are the highlighted items that you want to have featured in your DevCore articles. Values and principles and mandates, and the purpose and mission of the organization. Performance measures and limits, all agreed upon and ahead of time. Competency matrix to recruit board members. So making sure the board members that you acquire meet a certain level of competence for the needs of your development corporation. Very important ratio there. Shareholder and board member roles and responsibilities, the terms of reference, what their jobs are, what they're responsible for, where the limits are. Very important to get that ahead of time. Corporate governance policies, framework reviews, issue resolution, strategic planning, and reporting to and remaining accountable. Those are important components of your development corporation's articles. Who do they report to, how often, and what materials are they supposed to be sharing? Community advisory, you want to have an ability to have your community members a part of the development corporation, advising on its best interests in investments and in operationals. Not so much operations, but more about where the money goes to ahead of time. And agreements and repayments, so that the idea that community members will know there's money coming back to the community that the community's been investing in. So it works out very well that way. Thank you.
So when we take a look at this, the establishing or re-establishing the strategic direction of your nation's development corporation, these areas and aspects of what we're going to be talking about are things that should be included into your articles of incorporation. So there's a number of different ways, and again, every First Nation is different. So in terms of how you structure it, there are some key components that can be in one place or ideally in multiple places. So you have, for example, a value set in your articles of incorporation. You also have it in your governance policies, in your shareholder agreement, and you have it in a number of places. So it's absolutely well understood that throughout all behavior of the organization that this is expected to be adhered to. So at the very least, what we want to see is the inclusion of these things into an articles of incorporation. First and foremost, that is the values and principles. So values are those things that we consider the most important things. They are the most valued pieces of understandings that inform our behavior, inform what we adhere to as groups. We have shared values. So my values around family may be slightly different from Mark's values around family. When we have a discussion, come to a shared agreement of what that means, we can then better behave in a way regarding family that is more acceptable to both of us and creates less risk and less arguments. So that's exactly what you want to have in terms of your organization's value set. So if you have either a CAO or project managers or a joint venture partner or another nation, you want to walk through those value sets to understand what those things that are the most important to them and what that means. So for example, profits for a CAO might mean, or a CEO might mean, profits for the development corporation as much as possible at the expense of the nation. And really what the nation might be saying is profits and wealth building, that includes all of the nation. So again, really important to get those definitions clear and understood. It's also important to understand that our value set as it relates to how we work with others is slightly different between person to person. They are markedly different between cultures. First Nations and Indigenous peoples' cultures are collectivist, while the Western US model is individualistic. So it means that when you're negotiating an agreement across the table and you say, what's in it for us? You might be meaning our development corporation, our entire nation, or entire tribe. And yet that person negotiating for whatever organization on the other side might be individualistic and thinking, what's in it for me and my bonus or my company, and that's it. They don't consider the broader spectrum that collectivist people do and carry first and foremost at the forefront. So really important to understand that those value differences create conflict, create misunderstandings and risk. And it's important to understand when you're speaking to someone who's got different values, you're speaking a different language unless you clarify those things.
If we look at the last statement on the page there, given that values inform behavior, it is critical that development corporations have consistent values with the First Nations values, because that's where the mesh has to happen. It has to be that agreed upon shared value set going forward between the community and its development corporations, so everyone's needs are being met.
And values change at glacial speed. They change very slowly. It's something that's deeply embedded in us as who we are as people. So our values around respect, relationship to the land, all of those things go back thousands of years. But there are new values in terms of how people inform their behavior that change a bit, and that kind of thing has to be understood. The difference between principles are those rights and wrongs. So for example, if we said profits, including for a CEO, making as much money as possible, but the principles say don't do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical. Well, that's your principles. This is what we want to see happen. These are things most important. The principles are the things of what's right and wrong. And we see that confused a lot. And values are always confused too. So values can be anything, but it's whatever it is that's most important to a person or a group of people. And the shared values are those by a group of people. When we go into the next slide, oh, sorry, I wanted to mention this too. So again, values are those things most important. The rights and wrongs of how that understanding is expressed through our behavior are the principles. The actions and the behavior flow from there, and that becomes our knowledge and wisdom. So when we take a look at Indigenous knowledge, we don't quantify into these classifications. We know it because we respect our elders and we carry this knowledge for generations. And that knowledge and wisdom is something that we just now do. It is just who we are. It is our way of being. And in that, we still see that value set reinforcing those behaviors on a constant basis. So when we take a look at establishing a development corporation and the express behaviors of the development corporation, values are absolutely critical. And they should be articulated by the leadership to set the direction of the organization, as well as the principles, what's right and wrong in terms of protocols and practices in your customary laws. When we take a look at in the Western world, I'll let Mark speak to it, but this is the Western world's expression of values. And we're starting to see this grow and grow. And if anything, values is considered the 21st century leadership mechanism.
And so, as Lara alluded to, value-based leadership structures being incorporated into large international corporations is meeting their values and goals around growth in revenue, which has been demonstrated to be 4 times faster. We've got rates of job creation, which then grow exponentially, rating up at 7 times faster. Stock prices growing and 12 times faster. It's all very incremental, as you can see, a very, very consistent slope upwards. And then proper performance is marginally, more than marginally, significantly improved because everyone's agreeing and coming together around a value set that they can all agree to and move the corporation forward, adopting a shared value system similar to our first people. So interesting that that evolution from corporations is nice to hear.
And in research, when I was doing my master's, that is one area too, when we see joint ventures and partnerships fail, when those value sets aren't aligned. When they are aligned, we start to see all of these benefits unleashed. So it's really important to reflect and examine your values and share those and articulate those as a basis for any organization being developed, including your nations. So when we take a look at this again, most important to describe what your value set is, but also the value set itself. And most importantly, try to use your own language. English is a bastardized language. It's made up of several different languages. It really doesn't have an ability to express an idea as well as our languages. So it's really important to go back to your language, and you may have to try and find ways to describe it more meaningfully. But when you train and educate people on your language and the depth of that meaning, not only first and foremost, because it is a community-owned development corporation, does that resonate for your citizens, but it'll start to learn to resonate with others. So again, the principles and some of the ones that we've just put in there as an example, those things around what is right and wrong actions that we'd see expressed potentially in a development corporation might be things like make sure it's consistent with our values. Any work you do, any business development, any resource management is going to be consistent with our values. And most again, our relationship to the land and respect. So it's stewardship of the land. The next one is engage citizens. The importance of engaging your citizens as a participatory government to make sure that they have a voice in everything that's being realized. They set the direction based on their goals and needs. You check in with them and report on progress, and they say, actually, we wanted a gas station so we could also have this mechanics business next to it, and we want to make sure that there's a space for that. Those types of corrections allow you to do better work, increase across the board, wealth creation, not profits, money only for the development corporation, but wealth creation in terms of bringing up everyone's self-sufficiency and capacity to be independent and have that type of broad-based wealth, including health, pride, wellness, all of those things. Effective business development, growth, and management. So obviously that's a key function of the development corporation, meaning that it's also something that should be done with citizens, so that as you develop those opportunities and share those things with partners in terms of job opportunities or contract opportunities, it's with your citizens too. Sound financial management, standard practice according to international financial reporting standards, accountability, and that most importantly in terms of good governance means that good corporate governance requires reporting. And that means reporting to those people who have an interest in this and whose assets are being utilized, anyone affected by the outcomes. In this case, again, the big failed premise is that for most lawyers, they go with articles of incorporation that limit the field of accountability only to shareholders, when really it's the assets of the entire nation, the citizens, their natural resources, their human resources that are being utilized to develop this corporation, which means it should be accountable directly as well to citizens through quarterly and annual reporting in an easy to understand fashion that can build their capacity for future generations, not just for today's profits.
We want your membership engaged in this process, and so that when you give them information that has to be something they can comprehend and get some value from. Don't just accept what's given to you from a corporate ledger sheet, from a CFO. If it doesn't make sense to your community members, ask for it to be translated in a way that membership can be engaged and have a comprehensive understanding of what's going on. That's in the best interest of your whole community.
And this is one of the things, and I'm just hearing Mark speak, and it reminds me of a conversation we've had before with some of our clients. And that is being honest enough with yourself and with others to be able to say, I don't understand. Make it understandable for me. Because as a leader or someone developing this corporation, if you don't understand, the average citizen won't, and you're doing a disservice to everybody if you don't understand and you're not able to have that articulated and understood and build the capacity of everyone to be aware and understand what's going on. So it's really important to, at every step, build capacity. So again, as we always say in the principles too, include as much as possible in your own language, because again, this is a First Nations organization. And I remember probably 20 years ago when I was helping to establish a development corporation, and I was meeting with INAC at the time, and one of the officers said, a business is a business is a business. There's no such thing as a First Nations business. And that what really propelled me to want to dive into this, because I so strong-heartedly disagreed with that. And this speaks to that. Really, the behavior of an organization, the behavior of the people in the organization is all based on some premise and ideas that are the founding pieces that set the direction of the corporation. And if it's not set properly, and if people don't fully understand what that is in terms of articles of incorporation, values, principles, mandate, purpose, all of those things, it's so easy to see it go astray and not do what it's meant to do. So it's really important to slow down, build that capacity, and have everyone understand, or else you might be running into those problems down the road.
Purpose statements and mandates. Using words such as purpose or intent is to focus the attention of the statement to principles controlling the development corporation. So you want to have that established early on, and the focus is on why the development corporation is being established. What's its purpose and role? What are the intended outcomes? Many of our First Nations clients have stated they will also include a few other details, but it's important to get that premise discussed. Take the time to find out what that development corporation is to do for you, creating consistent, sustainable financial benefits to ensure the DevCorp sustainability and reinvested back into the nation. Again, it's wealth creation, as Lara indicated. It's not just about the money, it's about wealth. That comes in many different forms. Skills, training, employment, and contracting opportunities. Again, round it out. How can the whole community benefit and be a part of what's going on in developing a corporation? Sustainable development, management, protection of the territory, making sure the values of the community come back into the DevCorp. Developing a hard, so when the development corporation looks at its investing, it looks at bringing hard assets into the community that benefit the community going forward. So if a business partner comes in, wants to do a business with you, sometimes you can ask them to bring in some of the assets, some of the infrastructure as part of that process to be left behind for the benefit of the community. That's an important process going forward. And then the DevCorp can be a part of revitalizing culture in your community because it can be incorporated into business operations. It can be used to fund some of the cultural development, but it's an integral part of your community's value set. And if cultural revitalization is something your community is in the process of endorsing, your DevCorp can be a part of that as well. In the way it operates, the way it reflects back the values of your community in its corporate world.
So one example, and there's so many, but I'm just thinking of Squamish Nation, the highway. That was, of course, a impact benefit agreement, but there are business applications similar in that everything that's created can and should promote understanding and awareness and expression of your culture. Just thinking of Tsawwassen Shores, and they've got a large condo development right next to a huge mall that they've developed. And you walk through the mall and there's art patterns and culture everywhere that creates understanding and support for the work of the First Nation, including in the condo development. They have a longhouse. That's their gathering space. And it's beautiful because it's beautifully situated. It's massive. And it really holds hands up to the idea and the practice of the big house that they used to have. And that understanding and awareness builds, and there's more support. And it's, again, self-perpetuating.
Important that the DevCorp also protect the intellectual property of the nation as the culture in your community develops and it becomes more in the common place. The Development Corporation has an opportunity to make sure it doesn't get exploited, make sure that it's protected, along with all the other cultural assets that are unique to your community. As part of the preservation, the DevCorp can be charged with that responsibility. So when they do work in their community, they do the proper protocols around archaeology and restoration work that meets the cultural needs of your community. That's an important aspect to never let go of. And as Larry indicated, two good examples of how those communities in a big urban project manage to bring their values into it so that people shopping and experiencing that area get a sense that the nation's been integrally involved in the process and their interests and values have been respected. And that's important.
And on that, what we find is that intellectual property laws don't align with First Nations ways of knowing and being. And so we find quite often for tourism-based nations, so we did this work, I did this work, 15 years ago with the Musqueam Nation as we entered into the 2010 Olympics. And the idea was as we open our home to the world, what are those things we're willing to share? And what are those things that are sacred we're wanting to protect? And that's the same idea for Development Corporation. What are those things that need to be protected and making sure that there are protections in place to be able to ensure that those things are respected?
Citizen capacity development. The DevCorp can be designed in such ways that, as Larry indicated, the desire to have a service station for fuel in your community, but at the same time, there's someone in your community who's a mechanic. The idea that that service station could have a garage bay assigned and a small business operator could be in place. That's an important part of the development opportunity, but also the DevCorp can reach out and do small business workshops, improve financial literacy amongst the community members so that those members of the community can reach their own aspirations. As we know that a significant part of our employment population in Canada is a small business operation, and small business is underrepresented in our First Nations communities. And so the DevCorp can be looking to improve those capacities of the membership so that everyone can be either part of the DevCorp or branch out on their own and be successful elsewhere.
So when we take a look at a mission purpose statement that leadership should define when they're establishing a development corporation or re-establishing a development corporation, using words like purpose or intent, focusing on what the constituents' realized outcomes are intended to be. Again, wealth creation, and we have a little definition that we've used from a lot of research that's been done in the area of Indigenous wealth creation. And that includes health status, work-life balance, education skills, social connection, civic engagement, a whole host of things, again, as Mark said earlier, that has nothing to do with just money. It also means that when you develop a purpose or a mandate statement, it refers to the primary methods you speak to in your purpose statement around how this is going to be realized. And you always have to, similar to a vision statement, refer to the constituents who are intended to be beneficiaries of this work. The entire purpose statement should be in English, however, in general practice. However, again, we encourage you as much as possible. This is your nation's development corporation. Do it in English, maybe as a second piece. If you can, if at all possible, move it to your own language. Again, create supporting awareness and understanding of your language and culture and the depth of that language and the culture that's reflected in it.
And that's where your DevCorp can be sponsoring that kind of activity as a part of its corporate culture, is the inclusion of language at every opportunity. It could be signage, it could be mission statements, and so forth. We know that our First Peoples languages are very much more articulate and specific to your territory, and that should be what you're reflecting in your development corporation. It's yours.
So the next part we're going to talk about is performance measures. So performance measures are something that came around from something called a balanced scorecard sheet, and a lot of development in the early, I think it's 1970s, when the first spaceship was built and a massive project of this scope was first undertaken. And they realized they had to have some really, really comprehensive ways of tracking progress. So performance measures are those tools that allow us to say, we can agree upon what our intended purpose is. So for example, a small business development arm of the nation's development corporation might be to support the increased number of businesses. Well, how do you measure that? You'd want to have something around using as much as possible number, percentage, or dollar figure. And that's only because we can then quantify that. We can get it in black and white and as clear as possible and less subjectivity. So if we say we want people to feel good about the development corporation, that's very difficult to measure, and it's very subjective and really introduces the opportunity for arguments, risk, and issues. When we get really clear on what it is we can measure progress on, we're able to then measure it and realize progress. So each of those things that we said in terms of intended outcomes can be measured and should be measured on a regular basis, not only in terms of establishing your agreements, but also checking on your agreements and renewing and checking the progress of each of your agreements, whether it's a joint venture partnership or your development corporation, on an annual basis at the very least. Good performance measures are also the chain of cause and effect. So if I do a really good job realizing the development of a gas station or a franchise in our nation's territory, then I can step forward and say, I established this many businesses, this much return on investment, these many jobs and creation, all of those things. And it makes me feel good about what I do. And I'm really clear on what I'm going to be evaluated on. And those people who work within a development corporation want to be evaluated on the good work they do as well. And when they're clear on it, they can lean in really hard and do really good work if they know what they're striving towards. So clarifying performance measures is critically important to be able to say, this is what we're going to measure. How did you do? And in doing so, of course, it's always important to, as a leader, to be able to say, if you didn't realize that, how come, and what can we learn, and how do we get back on track to go towards that goal again?
And so one of the mantras we like to use is what measures matters. Okay, you've got to create measurements that can really be easy to articulate: number of jobs created, increased educational outcomes, reductions in needs for healthcare services. Those are quantifiable, measurable values that everyone can come to agreement on, and it really matters. You can really share them well.
And the important point about performance measures for leaders and for people to report out on a regular basis and demand that reporting, that's a difficult conversation leaders have to have, is demanding that reporting, is to make sure that leaders also don't micromanage. If you focus on the strategic level, as always, we always say, the bylaws, policies, and procedures by which a community organizes itself, leaders can then also talk about the performance measures, which is easy to be able to focus on and have that conversation around realizing progress of what the citizens want. But it also allows people to stop and step back from saying, I didn't like the color of that shirt that person was wearing that day, or I didn't like the tone of voice. Well, how are you measuring their performance? yes, if they're realizing all of these things and they're adhering to all the policies that you set out, which can be updated regularly, they've done their job. So it allows leaders to step back. If they can hold on to those reins as performance measures, that allows them to realize the best strategic performance in an organization. So we always say leadership must control all it must, not all it can, because it's really easy for leaders to step over that boundary and start micromanaging or undermining the authority by which those people they've hired who have that expertise. So when we take a look at that type of planning, and again, what leaders define, it's the direction and what should be achieved, not how it should be achieved. That means the strategic goals, objectives, and limits, meaning that don't do this, don't undermine the financial integrity or the practices of our nation, those types of things. Don't fail to engage citizens in planning and reporting. Monitoring to ensure intended outcomes are realized is also very, very critical. A lot of leaders will start up a development corporation and just let it go and forget about it. And it really has to be something, again, that's top of mind. What are the rules by which you organize this organization? And if it's failed to report on its quarterly reporting or its annual reporting, that's when leadership has to step in and say, where is the report? That is a core function of this organization, is being accountable. And if it's not, we are going to step in. And that's when it's important for a leader to step in. Again, the strategic goals and objectives set through the mandate by which you set, and the limits are those things that you can establish in your agreement and or your development corporation's governance policies. A community economic development plan, when we take a look at this, is similar to a CCP, and that's a kind of comprehensive plan, and we always encourage to support this. So when we take a look at this, it's just a quick image to say that in your planning that should have all these details, the control mechanism is that leaders listen for and watch for those performance measures to be realized. And those people who are doing the work sit with leadership to define what those performance measures are, and then leadership uses that as a control mechanism to ensure that they're realizing progress and supporting that to get it back on course if needed. So we do have a question at this point.
Donna is asking, will we get a copy of the presentation?
Yes, Donna, thank you so much. We have actually shared one with Svetlana, and you will be getting one immediately after the presentation. So some of the performance measure examples, when we take a look at those development corporation mandates that Mark spoke to earlier. So consistent and sustainable financial benefits is very clearly understood to be, what's your return on investment financially? So dollar figure. Skills and training might be number of citizens trained, employed, and retained, and transitioning into management. Sustainable development and protection might mean citizens contracted and providing small business training and development as well. Adherence to land code and land use plan and protection of the traditional territory and your intellectual property policy. And when we take a look at some of those hard and soft infrastructure, that's resource management outcomes for, land again, sustainable net incomes for land, and protecting IP we've just spoke about, and nation capacity building, meaning the benefits of infrastructure legacies and cultural revitalization that is supported through the development corporation. And I'm expediting this a bit because we're starting to run short on time. We want to make sure we have enough time for everybody.
For the board matrix is important, that you have competency matrix developed for selecting board members. It's not just whoever volunteers. It should be someone who has some capacity. You've developed a certain list of criteria for selecting somebody, and do your best to find those people that meet your needs. And it's an important starting point for your organization. The competency matrix needs to be built. Typically, this includes a listed set of skills that the team should be possess, including financial management, understanding spreadsheets and so forth, corporate law skills, experience and or training to understand some of the legal paperwork that comes across your desk, business skills and experience and or training. So you want someone who's been potentially successful in a similar business outside the community, whose expertise you can benefit from. First Nations understanding and DevCore experience. Other people who worked in small business organizations or other First Nation development corporations make good board members. Business experience is important, especially if the industry is relevant to what you're working on. Leadership's establishing and reestablishing a First Nation DevCore should define what exactly the matrix should look like for their nation. So each nation, each DevCore is going to be unique. It's not cookie cutter. And so you've got to look at what you need, what's acceptable, and what kind of people you want to have to work collectively to benefit your organization.
And so we had a question about what DC means. So DC is our abbreviation for Development Corporation. Thank you for the question. So one thing that we always say in here too is that those competency matrix, the core skills that are required to operate that organization to realize its purpose, must be adhered to. Quite often we see nations pulling back to say we want representatives. That's great, but those representatives still have to have skills and competencies to be able to run the organization in such a way that it realizes its purpose. Otherwise, representation does nothing to be able to make sure that development corporation moves forward, and in fact can actually detract from the ability to move forward if those persons don't have the skills and competency required. So a lot of people, and I just want to clarify this at this point, refer back to that whole need for separation of business from politics. And that's something perpetuated from the nation building theory from the Harvard Nation Research Project, which we've been involved in. And we like calling the Harvard Nation Rebuilding Project. And we talked to Stephen, Dr. Stephen Cornell a number of times. And one of the things he really regrets is that that idea got so taken out of proportion. And really the idea is that there should be the separate organizations and competencies to be able to operate independent and interdependently, meaning they have to have an effective working relationship. So when representatives are set on the board, that's meant that they are still running that organization and they are accountable to the community as a whole, but they still have to have the core skills to be there. So you wouldn't put your nephew in the driver's seat of a truck just because you want to see that truck remain in the family. You want someone who's going to be able to drive that truck without killing someone. So that is the kind of same thinking, I think, that goes into something as serious as establishing a development corporation where the nation is investing all of its assets and hopes and dreams. That is requiring some skills and capacity with an interdependent, strong, healthy relationship with the nation. So shareholders and boards, roles and responsibilities, and these are things that could also be in the Articles of Incorporation. And that is the shareholders set the strategic direction, everything we're talking about at this point, including values, principles, scope, purpose, and limits. Establishing the board selection criteria is something we always recommend. Monitoring the board for compliance. So once a shareholder's been setting the strategic direction, they still have to monitor as well. And again, the best ones are the performance measures, because that way everyone stays at the strategic level. Is it fulfilling the purpose by which it was created? The board's roles and responsibilities are to establish the mission, how things are done, consistent with mandates set by shareholders, establish good governance policies, which means that they align with those things set out for the nation through the shareholders, hiring and managing the senior manager, monitoring operational performance. And again, these are the performance measures focus that we want to see, where a CEO might have more in-depth knowledge and activity related to operations, but still is focused on performance. So good corporate governance is really important. And just looking at this one really quickly, we lay this out because good corporate governance means that you have to have every single thing that a good leader, corporate leader, could and should have an impact on should be written down, pragmatically thought about, and established into policies. And a lot of people will say that policies are not our way. We're First Nations, we don't do that. We did. We did. You speak to any elder about your gathering, your longhouse, the protocols. Those were all policies and laws that a nation establishes to make sure that they organize in a way that's most effective. So not just doing whatever you want is something that will surely undermine a development corporation or a community. So what we want to do is make sure as much as possible that you write these things down, pragmatically think about what should happen, look at best practices, make sure that as you proceed, you entrench those ideas of organizations being organized and set out the rules more and more and more. And those nations that are doing really well, member two, a Soyuz hotel, all of those have huge, thick operations manual policy binders to make sure that every aspect of operations is clearly thought out and pragmatically planned to be most effective.
It also creates transparency in the operation as well, because it is written down, policies are there, and when there is a disruption to the policy or improperly applied policy, it's known to everybody and it can be fixed. That's an important part of having the policies in place.
And people taught. So if I breached a policy, Mark could say, that's not what we agreed upon. Here's the policy, and you can read it in black and white and say, well, I understood this. If there's ambiguity, the policy needs to be corrected. If there isn't, I need to say, oh, okay, I didn't understand. And then he can teach me now to make sure that those things are carried forward.
Or the corporation may not have properly instructed the staff or consultants on the process. And so that goes both ways. Making sure everyone understands the process and the policies, getting that value set locked, and everyone working together is an important process.
So we're just going to quickly go over these again. These is a PowerPoint you're going to get, but basically we always say good leadership is good leadership is good leadership. Good corporate governance means that your corporate governance policy manual should be divided into 4 portions. We always talk about the areas being how the board does its own work, how it relates to the senior manager, how it relates with citizens, and how strategic planning and reporting is undertaken. These next few slides just go into the details of what those policies are and go into some specific policies you may want to consider or you may want to develop out for your community. We are running low on time, so I just want to make a quick mention that the advisory committee is something we always recommend, again, to build capacity and support small business development, engage citizens who aren't decision-making, but can advise on the progress of the Community Development Corporation, who aren't made up of representatives from other groups, but who can actually build capacity and have relationships like heads of family or people who can have a more intimate conversation with all citizens. I think we have a question here as well.
And just before we get to the question, it's again that engagement with everybody who's going to benefit from the corporation. So the mantra we use is nothing about us without us. We're the community that the corporations to serve. We need to understand, and we have an obligation to be engaged as well. And so that way, knowing that process, keeping things open and transparent, everyone benefits and moves the nation forward.
So Justin, could you read the question, please?
Of course. Our question here is, what avenues are available to band members when their leadership does not keep an arm's length to their development corporation and corporations in general, and move towards having managing directors who manage the day-to-day operations? This is not typical practice and kind of defeats the reason for having corporations.
You're right, and that shouldn't happen. So what should happen if you do have a development corporation go rogue, or the leaders who are entrusted with that responsibility, as you can have either the shareholders step in. So the board would be the first one to step in for any operations pieces, and that's their responsibility. If the board's not doing its job and decides that it was established to create gravel pits, and that in land development was its only purpose, and it starts to develop hotels, completely different animal beyond its mandate and scope, that's when the shareholders step in and say, you breached the scope of which your organization was established. Tell us why, and let's get back on track. And if there's a good reason for doing so, fine. If there isn't, then that's when shareholders step in, and they can actually fire the entire board or dismiss the entire board and say, you are not doing your job, you're fired, and pull them. And that's the job that shareholders always forget in our communities. They have that authority and ability to do that. And it means that, again, they have to stay at a very high level, performance measures and reporting, and after they set the direction, but they can go in and fire an entire board. Now, if the shareholders aren't doing their job, the community then can approach leadership and say the shareholders aren't doing their job by holding the board or operations accountable. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Thank you. Other agreements that are typically needed are engaged with the DevCorps and the community are loan repayments, making sure that if the community has invested in the DevCorps development startup, that there is a plan to pay that money back. And it should be open agreements and loans set up in such a way that they're transparent and so forth. Reinvesting agreements show support how the DCO will provide payments to the nation. That's an important thing. Always open and transparent. Money's been given, money's got to come back. It's a balance. And finally, important to where as council members and leadership in a community become either engaged as citizens or on different aspects, recognizing what role they're playing. And we use the word hats in reference to that. What hat am I today? Am I speaking as a leader in the community, or am I speaking as a community member? And so my position is slightly different in both cases.
And in this case, in development corporations, it's very often someone wearing the hat of a shareholder and that of a leader, and they have to be really clear to say, I'm speaking as, every single time they approach a conversation. So that brings us to the conclusion. We're just a couple minutes late. Sorry about that. We have a lot of information we wanted to share. And again, we integrate the questions throughout. If you have any questions and answer, we're going to give you just a few moments to please enter your questions. If you didn't want to put them in today, we'd really strongly encourage you to either put it in the chat room, which will remain open for a few minutes for you to ask any questions without the entire group having to be a part of it, if you'd like individual questions that are a little bit more confidential. If you'd like to also email us directly, you can do so and we'll be happy to help. Again, we're here to serve you and really appreciate your time and attention and support in building the capacity of our First Peoples in BC to improve quality of life for all of our people, for current and future generations. With that, thank you from both of us, and we hope and pray that all of you have a good day and are able to move forward with this knowledge and share it and use it to the best benefit of your people. Hawa.
Thank you so much, Lara and Mark. Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and insights with us. As Lara mentioned during the presentation, the presentation will be shared with all those that registered for the session. So there'll be emails sent out later this week. And this is part of CANDO's BC Links to Learning series. And we're hoping to continue with that series to educate and inform EDOs and lands managers in BC and Yukon. I believe we have another scheduled for Wednesday, July 29th, and we'll be sending out information via e-blast and e-newsletter over the next week or so. So again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Lara and Mark and Justin behind the scenes to share a tremendous presentation with us.
Thank you.
Take care.